Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, welcome to STARBURST magazine, and congratulations on the launch of Notebook.
Thank you very much.
How has the reception been so far from players or audience? That's the thing with an interactive film. It's kind of a weird sort of blend of the two, isn't it? Do you call
Mhm.
them players or do you call them viewers? It's a bit of a difficult one. But how has the reception been generally for you?
Good generally. It's been really interesting. There's lots to learn from the format. It's such a new format, like you're saying. We're kind of in between movies and games. We're obviously on games platforms. We're thinking of them as games. We're pushing them in that direction. There's just lots to learn from it, I think. As a project, it was amazing to be doing something during the lockdown under very unusual circumstances. So it was a real privilege to be making something. So yeah, it's just really interesting seeing, what we can take forward and what we can learn to kind of improve the format and yeah, just keep going forward. It's such an early stage of its evolution. I think as a way of telling stories that there's so much to digest.
Absolutely, yeah. Because obviously, back in the was it late '80s, early '90s is when the FMV kind of genre was born, really. Even earlier than that in some cases, and then it kind of went away. I think because of the technology limitations, and now with the vast advanced technologies that we possess, even in our own homes with our phones and the like, you can tell so many different stories in so many different ways. So it kind of made sense for the FMV or interactive film to make a comeback and, like you said, evolve. And you mentioned about doing it in lockdown. The whole film was done in the first lockdown. Is that correct?
It was done in this second lockdown,
Second, yeah.
but yeah, it was all shot in lockdown conditions. We sent all the cameras off to all the cast. They had to set them up with the guidance of our heads of department, which was, something that was quite new for them. They had to set up their own, prop design and art, production design in the background and their sets, on top of, covering however many pages a day of divergent narrative paths. So it was quite a challenge for them. Um, and of course, they didn't have people on set to kind of gee them on in the same way. So, they were really up against it. But I think, they did an amazing job and it wouldn't have been what it is without them.
Absolutely, yeah. And as a filmmaker myself, I know the limitations of making something in lockdown because I myself did as well, doing it remotely, and I know some of the challenges. I mean, fortunately, my story was very linear in comparison to Notebook. So yeah, I can only imagine the extra challenges. Um, and I guess it was such a new experience for the whole cast and crew as well as yourself. How did they sort of adapt and respond to this challenge?
Fortunately for me, the producers had done 5 dates before,
Mm.
which they shot all on iPhones, which was cool. And so they learned, there was a lot of learning that happened there, which I was able to profit from, obviously, which is great. Um, but yeah, they took on the challenges really well. It was tough. There was a lot to get your head around. But I think everyone just sort of went for it with enthusiasm and energy. You got to remember it was such a privilege to be making something at that time anyway, like it really was, and to be doing so in a format, like I say, that is evolving and adapting and learning. It was just such an amazing, privilege to be making it. So I think everyone we had on board understood that and really let into it, which was really great.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love the fact that so many people from all across the world were not letting something like a global pandemic, stop them from being creative. Because I know a
Mhm.
lot of people really suffered last year, and
Yeah.
continue to do so in terms of their sort of creative limitations. And it's a real shame. So that whenever something that is made during lockdown comes along, I'm always up for checking it out. no matter how small or big the actual project is. It's just such a it's inspiring, really, because we were so limited with what we could do, but we as creatives didn't let that stop us. So just to sort of take a little bit of a tangent, and talk about yourself rather than Nightbook.
Sure.
Where did your passion and love for film really come from? What inspired you to do what you do today?
Well, I really love storytelling. Really, I mean, that's what drives me. I think, and characters. I think that it's such an intrinsic part of what makes us human. That's how we communicate with each other. That's how we deal with the world around us. We don't really sit and make lists about things. We tell stories so that we can, better understand and empathize with different ideas. I'm also someone that's like not very I'm not very small talk. I'm quite big talk, and I think stories is quite is a fantastic way into big talk. It raises things in a way that's very there you go, there's the dog, promised you. It raises things in a way that people can relate to and understand on an emotional level, which I think is really important. And I'm just really fascinated by creating those dialogues with the audiences. And I just feel that filmmaking is such, and indeed games are such an amazing platform to tell the story, and they connect with people. People get to see things through other people's eyes. In games, they even get to experience a more direct experience with other people's worlds. And I think it's just a really important way of communicating and dealing with without sounding too pretentious, the life and what we have to deal with in our everyday world. So that's really what inspired me. I mean, to get into filmmaking. And there are lots of ways of telling stories. Obviously, I personally connected with the idea of telling stories through images.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, books still hold that special place in people's hearts, and they can still really, the talented writers can really get across that story. But we talk about evolution. The film has obviously been around for way before our time, and video games are still in its infancy. So yeah, molding the two together, it's the perfect way to tell a story. And because there are so many people take in information in different ways. Some people like to be told, some people like to do. So that's kind of the difference between film and games in a way. Is films tell you what to feel, whereas games can really allow you to feel through the eyes of the characters. And with Nightbook, I definitely felt that you could play it one of two ways. Essentially, is you become the character of Laurelyn, or you can play it as if you were sat there. So take her existing relationships and mold them, or make up your own relationships from the get-go, which I think is something that a lot of interactive films do suffer with. And I think as well, what really appealed to me is, even though there are so many different endings, there's 15 different endings, which is mad. That's a massive achievement to have 15 different endings. But the story was engrossing, concise, and didn't overstay its welcome. I know, obviously, you want people to replay it because there are so many different outcomes. Some other interactive games, I found that the runtime is far too, it's overstaying its welcome. That I'm less likely to want to go, right, I'm gonna play through. I'm gonna watch this and play through this again. Whereas with Nightbook, it was a really suitable length for the story you were trying to tell. So that balance really, really worked out. How for you? What were some of the biggest challenges with obviously keeping continuity and everything like that to get from point A to point XYZ and then X, Y, Y. You know, all these different endings. What were some of the biggest challenges you personally faced as a director?
I mean, as you know, as a filmmaker, keeping continuity across something that's linear, that you don't shoot chronologically for various reasons, is a challenge in itself, right? So then adding in multiple different outcomes based on what you've done before and how your relationships are stacking up, and there was a lot going on with this, which may not be totally apparent the first couple of times you play it, but the relationships do really change what your outcome is. They really do. So yeah, creating the sort of continuity of performance and emotion, I guess, across all the different parts was very challenging. Knowing where you've come from and where you're going to. Also, again, in a linear movie, that's sort of something you have to deal with. So I have some sort of grounding in that anyway, but then kind of reconciling that across lots of different narrative paths. It was about just thinking very hard about that. I mean, I've never had to think so hard in my life, frankly. That was very challenging. But even silly things that, you know, we'd have 25-minute conversations on set about which hand Julie was holding her phone in, because in the next room she had to go in there with the phone in her hand, and you're going, oh, it's so silly, but but it has to all scan. And, you know, we tried our absolute hardest to catch all of those things with a very small crew, because we were on a Zoom call. And I think it was just super challenging. Julie was actually, you know, in another life, I think she was probably a continuity expert, because she was just, she was like, oh no, I was here and I had it in my left hand and I swapped it here at this point and I turned around, and, you know, you're like, how do you remember? You know, on top of giving an amazing performance, setting up the camera, doing all that stuff, she's also there going like, no, I had it in this hand, it's fine. And, you know, 99% of the time, she was absolutely right. So that was quite amazing.
Definitely helped you out as well.
Hugely, yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was really challenging, and trying to, I mean, the idea is that whatever path you play, even if you don't get like a quote unquote good ending, should be narratively satisfying. You should feel like you're getting a story, whether that's sort of a tragedy or not, isn't sort of how you do in the game in the sense of it. But I think that really helped, because it meant that at different steps of the story, you're kind of doing the same emotional beat of the story, but different things are happening. If you see what I mean. So the internal journey of the character is quite similar at those moments, but the external journey of the character is very different.
Absolutely, yeah. I've at the moment got two different endings. One I would consider bad, and the other good. Without obviously without spoiling anything, but I'm sure we can.
Sure.
I'll mention which ones they were once we've cut the recording.
Yeah, great.
But yeah, it's you mentioned Julie. She's a absolutely fantastic performance. That's something I really connected with, and I find that with this with characters that an audience is playing as or seeing the world through their eyes, it's so important to get that performance right, and to have a character that is relatable in a lot of ways. You know, the fact that she's, you know, looking after her dad, partner is away, and even though it's not a story typically about isolation, the fact that you know, obviously it was done within the confines of isolation, and as the story progresses, you sort of see how isolated Laura Lynn feels because of what's happening in the story. It all just fits really, really, really well.
Great, thank you.
Right, so I think I've got time for one more question before we wrap up.
Sure.
Without spoiling anything for those who are watching who haven't played Nightbook yet, which is out now on PS4, Xbox One, Steam, Switch, and even iOS as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Without spoiling, what path, if you were to play, or if you have played, what sort of path would you take? Do you take the path of playing with these existing relationships in play and you're molding them, or do you sort of want to the way that you play is start off with a clean slate?
So I have played it many times. It's a funny one. I think it's hard for me to say because I'm so close to it, I guess. But I kind of feel like I said, whatever path you play, I wanted it to be a consistent, satisfying narrative, whether it's good or bad. So I think what I'm interested in personally, I guess, would be just exploring all the different paths and seeing how that works as different stories. As someone who's fascinated by stories and the structure of stories, I'd be like, oh, okay, so how's that pan out? Because the story's going off in that direction. How does that work as a story? Does that work as a story? But yeah, I think I definitely try and play to win, as it were. Like I try and play to get the best ending, because I think, I want the best for Laurelyn. But it was also really important when we were making it, and when you're directing something like that, not to prioritize in your head a particular path, right? Because then you build in an unconscious bias about how much attention you're giving to certain things. And I think I'm still in that, to be honest.
Absolutely.
It sort of doesn't answer your question, but
no. I understand it. Whether or not the viewers of this interview will, but I'm sure they will do once they play it. Because as I said, it's out now, and you can go and get it. Loads of other great stories from Wales Interactive. That's quickly becoming the leading publisher when it comes to these interactive films. There's some really great stuff. You mentioned five dates. You've got The Complex as well. Same director for both of those. I actually spoke to him when The Complex came out, and that was another really interesting one that I thoroughly enjoyed. Very, very quick bonus question.
Sure.
Can you share any details of what you're up to next?
I can't. There is things in the works. I'm still looking at the interactive format very closely.
Nice.
But as I say, I really do think it's kind of in its infancy. There's so much more to do. There's so much more to learn. And I just think as a format, it's going to just keep improving. We just need to keep making things and keep learning.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, once again, congratulations on the launch of Nightbook. And Alex, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me on.